I don't think you're in it. No, yeah, you are. Am I? Am I in this one? You can be in next door if you want. Yeah, you meant to be in it.
Yeah, that's the yeah, I thought that was fine. Yeah, come on, Raj.
I thought it was really fun to see
Hi there. Do you reckon we'll sit around this table in the middle? Because it looks like... You will need to do a screen at some point now, actually, so... You guys can see some ways that you might be able to use it in your own work. If you have any questions at any point, just stick up your hand and we'll do it that way, I think. So my name is Daniel, and I work with a sort of partnership of sort of geography teachers, artists, academics, board game makers, different people. And we're working together because really we haven't come at this from the angle of wanting to sort of teach children about safety education. We're coming at it from the angle of thinking that geography is really important, and actually if children are going to learn about the world, they kind of need to be out in it, and actually there's a lot of restrictions at the moment. And we talk about how sort of children's geographies are being more and more confined in different ways. Within the school, they're being restricted more in terms of policy, not letting teachers get out of school so easily to go and do things. But then within their own personal lives as well, you know, increasingly parents are restricting how much children are allowed to sort of play outdoors. And I think it was about 1.5 years, maybe 2 years ago, that we were doing some working on campaigning for geography and trying to promote geography. And an article came up, I think it was in the Daily Mail, that showed this beautiful map of how far children were allowed to roam, you know, sort of 30 odd years ago. Do you know the piece I'm talking about? And then how far they're allowed to sort of roam now. And we sort of brought those two ideas together, sort of thinking, right, well, maybe we can sort of challenge this cotton wool culture and this sort of issue of risk aversion by actually talking about children playing out, you know. And ultimately, I think I probably don't need to argue with you guys too much, but in terms of children's, their own personal, mental and physical health, it makes sense for them to be outdoors rather than inside. But actually thinking about things on a wider scale, you have more community cohesion if children are out and talking to people. And on top of that, if we want children to empathise with global issues, from refugees to conflict to climate change, again, we need them to be outside empathising with the environment. We were talking earlier, weren't we, about sort of hedgehogs and tin cans and that kind of thing. And I think if children are having that sort of relationship early on, then how can we grow that? So we came up with this idea for a book called Mission Explore. The basic idea being a set of small challenges that ask children to go out and do things they wouldn't normally do. And we call this guerrilla geography, and we do it as adults as well. And it's about getting people to think geographically at times and places that they wouldn't normally expect to come across it. And that might be doing some strange bit of geography, for example, thinking about where lost cats go. You know, that's not a school geography to think about doing, but I think in our everyday lives, where lost cats goes is far more relevant maybe than meanders on rivers and that kind of thing. But also maybe at times when people wouldn't expect to come across it. So we go and do things at sort of festivals and that kind of thing as well. You don't expect to see a group of sort of teachers at music festivals, that kind of thing. So we took the idea for the book of having these different missions to lots of different people. We finally came across a publisher who was willing to sort of give it a go, a small publisher called Can of Worms. And it seemed really important to us that that we thought very sort of carefully about the safety element. We wanted to make sure that we sort of managed to strike a right balance between children going out and exploring and being able to consider the risks that were involved. And the problem that we faced in that is, I think that it was not last year but the year before, that ROSPA had a big conference about children playing outside more. I don't know what it was called, but it was a sort of big sort of conference. And on the ROSPA website, there's scores and scores of information about anything that's basically controlled in terms of children playing the control. But if, as a parent like I am, you go in and try and find advice, say, well, actually, I just want my kid to play on the street, like, what sort of advice do I give in that context? There's, you know, very, very little there to sort of help you within that, despite the fact that the government agencies, there's all sorts of sort of journalists who have written books about this issue and stuff. But when it comes to the actual implementation of it, it's a bit more difficult. So I got in contact with these guys, and we had some interesting conversations. The first conversation was, there's been a really healthy conflict in the first conversation between us wanting to throw children into rivers and the conversation being, well, you can't quite do that, but here's what you can do, and talking particularly around the idea of not necessarily not letting children go and take risks, but thinking about how we can help them to recover and identify risks and those sorts of things. So a little bit later, we finished the book, and I'm going to give you guys a copy of the book to have a look at. Might just be enough to look at one each. And the book doesn't sit particularly well in the activities shelf in bookshops, because generally speaking, bookshop shelves are gendered for starters, and it's not a boy's book or a girl's book. Secondly, it's small, and all activity books are A4, so in Waterstones it sort of tends to just disappear. And it's not all sort of cartoons on the front and that kind of thing. But we've done that for very sort of specific reasons. It's because we don't think that adventurous play is to do with like your ethnic group or your gender. And we think that if you put these sort of cartoons on the outside of the cover, then maybe the older children are far less likely to engage with it. Whereas you can put this in your pocket and you can walk around the streets and things. Now, for children, it means going off and doing the missions. And it's aimed at sort of 9, 10-year-olds up. In reality, my 6-year-old can do half the things in this book. And people will say, well, who should use this when? And clearly, it depends on the child, and it depends, to bring it back to this, and I think that maybe this is a conversation that can happen far more within communities, is about the specific geography of your local area. What's right for one person around the corner is completely different to the next house. We happen to live on a terrace street with a complete trashed back alley where kids can get hurt and stuff, but they can go and play there reasonably safely, I like the word reasonably. And in the front alley, because there's very few cars, very few people, it's okay. But just around the corner, there's families who can't do that because it's a bit of a through road and that kind of thing. I think that there could be a bit more conversation about precisely those things about children and parents making sense of their local geographies. And I found, certainly in London, and the local authority websites are actually like the neighbourhood website you can look at, and it shows you the level of crime, injury, different health issues, down to a postcode level for where you are. So rather than just sort of guessing the risk in the local area, actually you can make a reasoned judgment. And for people then who come back to me and say, well, what if your area is really bad for crime? Well, that doesn't mean you go out. It means you need to go and challenge that particular issue. That's not necessarily the solution. Anyway, so what I'll do before I show you what we did after this, I'll just give you a couple of minutes to have a look at some of his missions and see the sort of warnings we've got in here, and then if there's any questions, I'll take those. Okay, so if you want to, there's a bit of grass out there. If there's a mission you want to try, feel free. We were going to do one, but it's not. So just 5 minutes to have a look through, and then I'll show you the next thing.
Like the OAPs is
Yeah, OAPs. If anybody wants to note down a mission they might like to do, and then